Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Soulful Abundance Festival. I'm your host, Elise Preston, founder of Be More Connected, and today I am so thrilled to be here with Claudia Morales. Welcome, Claudia.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. And Claudia holds a license in clinical social work in the state of California to provide services to public schools. And her primary focus has been deactivating the impacts of trauma on communities that have been most impacted by systemic poverty, racism, and current immigration and incarceration practices. She has worked involved in the criminal justice system, as well as families harmed by mental illness, by exploring and resilience and healing practices. Claudia's work is informed by intersectional creative practices, such as the writings of Paulo Freire and poetry and teachings of June Jordan. June Jordan with Theater of the Oppressed, and Augusto Ball with the community work that she does in her practice. She is also inspired by the ongoing community organizing of creative social justice work all over the world and works with folks to reimagine and work towards more creative and more compassionate communities. And so I know that I read more of your formal bio, but would love for you to also have the opportunity to share a bit about your own journey of healing and how that has invited you into the work that you're doing in the world today.
Okay, thank you again. Sure. I think um, I always have to start at the very beginning. So my upbringing is a combination of a Colombian mom, immigrant woman, and my immigrant father, who is a Caucasian man from Canada. And just always seeing the difference between them and their experiences. My mom always kind of getting people call it microaggressions, but I know it feels more direct and like a direct assault on your humanity when people say things that allude to the fact that she didn't belong. And they told her that often. Her immigration experience was really flooded with trauma, domestic violence, and coercion, and she was really on her own. And despite being a college grad in Colombia and being a superintendent over there, she really had to start her way at the bottom, which for her was spending the night every other night at a hotel and every other night working 24-hour shifts at a sweatshop. And it was just very hard labor. My father had different experiences of trauma and attachment issues, but he wasn't treated like an immigrant at any point. And so just seeing that play out, also seeing my Colombian families internalize like white supremacy and wanting to be very close to whiteness. And my Canadian side, a lot of family members that I can't really be in relationship with because they have racist views in some cases. So just having that experience and then going back and reclaiming, well, what is it about my childhood that I can connect to? Because we need those anchors, right? And so I went back, and this sculpture back there is my mom's creation, and these indigenous pre-Columbian art forms always existed in our home environment. She even though she was a nun in Colombia, she also painted a lot of nudes, and she was always creating. And so I knew that my spiritual language wasn't so much the Catholicism that I grew up in, but it was the the sense of connection that I find when I create. And also when I learned the family's history in my mom's side, that was very like musical, very theatrical. I have like multiple family members that are always like in different types of creativity. And so that is definitely how processing resonated with me, and even spirituality and identity. It was kind of like a sifting through that had to happen. Yeah, so I came to this work beginning in community organizing, and then I realized, like, as people were sharing their trauma, I really wanted to deepen my ability to tend to their trauma, because people were sharing their traumas with me. And even though they were doing political work and we were trying to get gains politically, it felt like there was there was this awkward thing, like, how do I hold this, and what can I provide? So so I went to get my master's in social work. I was very lucky to work with Dr. Terry Jones, who established my School of Social Work, and he was in human rights. He was always for social justice, and he was very involved historically in the community, and everything had a racial justice lens. So it was just very fortunate. I felt very fortunate to learn under him.
Beautiful. And I really love the way that you described taking that time to reflect in on your childhood and finding the ways in which you could reclaim what were the things that were the threads that were able to support you with connecting into that deeper understanding of who it is that you were becoming and what kinds of things you were using to be able to apply actionably in the work that you were doing in the world as an adult. And I think it's so powerful to be able to just lean into the fact that, like, in this incarnation, our souls chose like a particular vessel to arrive here in. And as someone who is also biracial, and also just hearing from you, from your own story, like, wow, how powerfully formative it was to be able to have a sense of feeling into and leaning into both of those worlds, both of those spaces, a Colombian immigrant mother and then a white father, and how that informed all the different ways that you were learning and growing and expanding and sharing your own energetic gifts with the world. And yes, I think the question I'd love to, lean deeper into next is, you were talking about being in the community organizing space and just exploring, how do you hold all the trauma that is coming to the surface, maybe within your own experience, but also for other folks that you are working alongside or working with in community. And I'd love to be able to hear a bit more about how creativity and self-expression and some of these other really powerful tools that you use, how these can be supportive in holding that trauma and working more towards healing and liberation.
Absolutely. That is something I really want to reintegrate more. We did some creative work when we were organizing, and part of the trauma is obviously police violence and the traumas of poverty and being divested from and treated like an expendable person. Those were very common triggers in the undocumented community that came up. And so definitely, I'm so excited about the work of John Powell, who was, I was very lucky to have as a teacher when I was in community organizing, because we had great access to these powerful figures. And John Powell talks about othering and belonging, and how do we deepen and use language and send indications to folks that have been pushed outside, that they belong. And we not only do they belong, but we all belong to one another. There's not a separation between us, and there's not a separation of our responsibility and our duty to one another. That we have a responsibility to use whatever privileges we can get or we have in the society that we didn't earn, like light skin privilege that I have, to turn around and create and advocate and push and negotiate for systems that are inclusive, that send the signal that we all do belong to each other. Because white supremacy isn't only harmful to people of color, it also disconnects white identifying people from their own sense of humanity if they're not seeing the connection. And even just in my own family, I see that as the thread in the white side, like there's just huge disconnects, whereas in the Colombian side, everyone's just very integrated. They celebrate each other, they hold space just much more actively and intentionally.
Sure.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to creating immersive community events, and that's something I'm dreaming up right now with some partners. And in the interest of putting folks that have been most impacted by society's current harms and ills, I really wanted to center on the experiences of Black, Indigenous, um, trans, queer folks with disabilities and mental illness, and really like reimagine how can we work and heal and create all in one full swoop. How can we protect the earth? And I think that this is also leading to a new measure of how we calculate health. Like when we calculate the health of the earth, our mental health and our social health, just all, and the health of animals, like all in one full swoop. Like if we start to take on that lens, we can really reimagine not only how we show up for each other, but how we work. I would like to create a co-op. I think co-op models can be a really, really beautiful thing that um, people can use to like get out of poverty and have continual opportunities to share their creativity, and not because they fought a million people for it. I mean, we've been all conditioned to believe that there's something noble about competing, and I don't see it. I don't see it. It's like, why do we have to step on each other to survive? Like that whole basis, the whole premise is just so wrong. Because if our success means somebody else has failed and we've stepped on them to get what we need, I don't, it's not okay. That's not okay. Nobody should measure wealth that way.
Mm.
So
Yes, and it's also in complete contrast if we understand, as you were saying earlier, that we all do belong to each other and that we are inherently interconnected. Then competing, having that separation and fear and comparison, that no longer can even seem like a viable option, because your rising supports my rising, like your health supports my health. All of the ways in which, if as we start, as you were saying, to like reimagine what it means to work and heal and create together, recalculate our understanding of how we're even, what metrics we're using to identify health. I think that's really where we get to be moving forward towards in the future. And there's, yeah, I think there is a really beautiful way in which we are seeing all of these concepts and ideas becoming a bit more mainstream. And there is so much beautiful leadership that is happening in this space of collaboration, unity, interconnection, deep levels of like liberatory healing in the ways that you are doing, in the ways that you are describing. And there is also just such a powerful and pervasive grip and hold that these harmful and oppressive systems still have on a large part of the, I was going to say like the West, but the world, right? Like the entire world. And so I really enjoyed in our pre-interview conversation, we were chatting a bit about what is possible from that healed place where trauma and these systems of harm are no longer being replicated. And I'd love to bring that curiosity into our interview and into this conversation, and talk a bit about, from that futurism lens, like what kind of possibilities do you foresee?
Well, maybe you could dream this up with me because I feel like it's
Yeah,
all like shared dreaming, right? Like,
right.
but yeah, I really see it as being like having Black, Indigenous, femmes, and people of color like out in front leading. I'm reading Rachel Ricketts' book, Do Better. And
Mm,
I love the challenge of like using white privilege um, to share opportunities so that Black and Indigenous people can lead. So that means me taking a back seat. That means me like providing the support. I try to use, like currently I try to use tools like restorative justice and even my therapy tools
yeah.
for free for communities that have been like really impacted.
Sure.
So that's something I'm currently doing, but the future could be it could be so amazing. I mean, I really love that you're challenging me to dream because I think, like, say for myself, like I went through a nihilistic period because I was so entrenched in like grief and loss. My life had been really hurt by very complex grief at a very young age. And I was a nihilist. I was like, F everything, you know, it's all wrong. Let's tear it all down. And there's nothing, you know, and it took me so much effort to reimagine it and find
Mm,
pieces that are at least a goalpost, something I can latch onto. So I could see that not only I'm not the only one like seeing the value in these traits, but that the ancestors had something to say here, you know, like my ancestors time traveled, you know, with ceremony.
mm,
And that tells me that the way we've been conditioned to use time is just this very linear thing. Um, and colonialism has taught people like there's only one way being, one way of praying, one way of existing, one way of loving, and
mm,
then you die. And time travel and more ancestral knowledge is like, we're all here together. Let's imagine together what is possible. There's more ways of expressing sexuality and gender. And it's saying that even in this time, I can heal my child self.
mm.
Make, I can convene with my elder self. I can convene with my ancestors. Like I have access to that. And it's just so interesting how science is proving that too, that it's literally in our DNA, these ancestral um, remnants, and we can convene with them. We don't have to do it in isolation. So the future is collectivism. The future is feminine. The future is dynamic.
Mm.
The future doesn't rely on denial, oppression, and shame. The future makes room for celebration in multiple forms, and the future will not make survival a competitive sport. There'll be enough for all of us to exist, and also we'll be tending the earth so that future generations can also exist with in harmony, hopefully,
Yes.
non-violently.
So, so gorgeous. I feel like what you were able to express and communicate here just resonated so deeply with me. And that phrase about not making survival a competitive sport, because that is what capitalism does. And just imagine how liberating and free we can be if that's not the framework within which we're operating. And I love that you wove in, or just the way that you were speaking about um, time and being able to have this more multidimensional understanding of time and having a capacity to tend to and heal things that aren't maybe just in this very linear logical understanding of what the present moment is, and that welcomes in healing at an ancestral level as well.
Mhm.
So powerful. And
Yeah. And I do think we have to heal from a lot of ancestral wounds, because even as we may carry love for our elders, sometimes their this comes up a lot in therapy, is that a lot of elders expect complete obedience, and they call that respect. They want respect as obedience, but I think that this is a misinterpretation of what respect is. Respect is shared, and it's a two-way street, and I think the future will be more rooted in shared respect.
Mm. And it's so interesting that you just brought up this theme around obedience, because I actually have been working with a coach who is an Akashic Records reader, and what was coming through from some of my recent sessions was this deep ancestral wounding from my father. It was like very specific, 7 generations back in my father's line. And it was like directly linked to slavery. And that I, in this current incarnation, in this lifetime, have inherited wounding around obedience. And that's something that I'm experiencing at a spiritual, like energetic, physical level, that there's this level of obedience that I feel, and that I get to be able to live in the world in a way that is more free, that is more wild, that is more expressive, that is more authentic to me. And as I healed that, that also is supportive and healing for that, for those ancestors who I am like now carrying that energy that they weren't able to live out and like experience in their own lifetime. And that is, yeah, just something like when I heard that, it just really hit me profoundly and deeply. But for each of us, right, there are those different aspects of our own ancestry that we're carrying in this lifetime that we get to heal through and explore ways to embody a way of living in the world that is more free and less shackled to some of those like binding harmful energies that maybe our ancestors in their lifetime didn't have the opportunity to experience. And so that's a little different than the thread that you were speaking about, with respect being something different than obedience. But when you said that, I was like, oh, wow, this is like deeply connected to a lot of the themes that have been really up for me right now. In my own.
I think that's really powerful what you share, because it's also like, even as laws change, and slowly, obviously, not nearly as fast as they need to be, not as liberating as they need to be, not as direct investing as they should be, you know, especially to people who've been harmed directly by the government. But it's interesting that even as things do change, sometimes our ways of being continue. It's just that inheritance, you know, and there's inheritances of oppressor and oppressed, for sure, in my lineage. And I really appreciate a therapist friend of mine named Christmas Presence, and they're part of the Therapists of Color for Social Justice. It's a group I belong to, and I want to invite participants to check them out on Instagram. But they were the one that said that, you know, they have Chinese lineage, and so they have oppressor and oppressed in their lineage. And they talked about being able to give grace to the oppressor with the consideration that maybe, you know, in the afterlife, they were able to learn something. Maybe they healed, maybe they could change. And just having that grace allows us to give ourselves that grace too, for the oppression we've caused, the harm we've caused, as well, and can help with accountability, and not to look at that as an affront. And I think that we do see a lot of like backlash from white people and lighter skinned people, like, oh, I'm not like that. But it's like, it's okay. We've all been conditioned this way. And I mean, that's not okay, but it's okay if it's going to take a lifetime to unpack. and to continue to release and acknowledge. But we can't know what we don't know. So give ourselves that curiosity, like you said, to just dive deep and to continue to examine what's coming up, even if it is resistance at first, but like don't stop there, you know, even if it is defensiveness, but don't stop there. Like look at that defensiveness and like continue to unpack it, because you can't let it get in the way of creating the society we need to all create together.
Yes. And as you spoke about this, it really reminded me of how in Resmaa Menakem's work in My Grandmother's Hands, the ways in which he talks about privilege being actually something that desensitizes white people from being able to understand the
Yes.
ramifications and the levels of harm that are deeply felt and experienced by people of color, and that complicates their relationship with being able to have an understanding of like reality as it exists for so many other
Absolutely.
folks. And that resistance and defensiveness often comes up because if there was able to be a level of understanding or acceptance about harm done, then it quite literally transforms their entire understanding of their worldview and who they are. And so, as you were saying, it is this very complex dynamic, and we have to find the ways that we can give ourselves grace in this unfolding process, because it is very deep and very multi-layered, and we do have to, if we want to be agents of healing and change, be willing to go deep and face those continual layers that will be coming to the surface.
Yeah, Rachel Ricketts talks about that a lot in terms of like, who told you you should always be comfortable? You know, she's just directly asking, especially like white people, like, why are you conditioned that you are always going to be comfortable?
Right.
That is not the lived experience of most people, especially if they're being attacked by the state, you know,
Right.
or divested from as a community, or, you know, surveilled, policed, like treated with suspicion all the time. So obviously people who are treated like that are never comfortable, but it's like we all deserve a baseline level of survival, in my opinion, regardless. And that would be better for everyone, right? It doesn't do anyone any well when you see homeless people everywhere in the streets. You know, it's not, there's nothing redeemable about that experience. It's not okay for, I mean, our literal brothers and sisters to be out on the street. And but the removal of it, I think that what you were speaking to is that when people say, oh, this didn't directly affect me, so it doesn't affect anyone, that is like, so if you like in psychology, you learn that that's almost like object impermanence. It's almost like a very, very young way of looking at the world, of saying like, if I cover my eyes, there's nothing there, you know? It's like, so that way of looking at the world is very infantile, because it's not taking accountability into effect. It's not allowing your worldview to be changed. So what if it has to change? That's okay. As we grow, it should change. You know, it should, we have the capacity to expand. We are expansive beings. We can hold truths. We can hold so much. And especially if we're leaning towards more connectivity, it will be good for us in the end. But we can't, I want to invite like your white audience members and also like light-skinned people like me to really just like take into accountability everything that you can, because it doesn't mean like a lot of things were not easy for me. I've definitely gone through a lot of struggles, and I'm not saying I didn't. However, I do maintain a commitment that in whatever way I can share the privilege that is unearned, then I will, you know, I must.
So powerful. And I love the way that you were talking about, we have the capacity to expand. We are so expansive. And that is such a beautiful like gift and also responsibility that we have as humans, to not stay stagnant, to be open to change, to know that we are these like once in a lifetime gorgeous stakeholders on this planet, and that the things that we do carry a powerful ripple effect. The decisions that we make, the actions that we take, the conversations that we have, like not to take those things lightly, and that our relationships with each other, the work that we do, can really facilitate healing or change versus just facilitating more harm and replicating of the same old things that we need to let go of.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are all like locked in by denial, shame, blame, scapegoating, minimizing, avoidance. It's all of the same factors that play out in family dynamics when there's violence in a domestic partnership, violent relationship, or even substance abuse, child abuse. All of those are all held together, but by denial, shame, blame, avoidance, scapegoating, pretending. And we don't have time for that. Like you said, we're on this earth one time. So we have to make it count. We can't just sit here and pretend that every day is the same as the other. When we're here to grow, and we're here to expand and to make more room for what will be beneficial for everybody.
Yes. And with that, I'd love to hear a bit about some of your areas of growth, your current growth edges in your life and your work.
So like I shared, I really want to form a co-op. I'm really excited about that. And so that I hope to see that down the line soon. I also want to create community events that where it's an immersive healing experience. And I've been very lucky to get to do some workshops for some museums. So maybe I'll be able to like come back around to those museums and art spaces that I've been a part of. Just even before community organizing, I was organizing a lot of community art events that were music, art, fashion, just kind of everything. Yeah. But I realized that at that time that even though my dream had always been like to be a fashion designer or an artist, like I realized I didn't want to just sell art. Like that didn't seem like, it didn't feel like enough, you know? So I'm just very excited that I can start to integrate a lot of this creative work back into the theme of healing, especially now that I think I read on Instagram today about how we're experiencing traumatic grief and we're grieving trauma. They said it like that. And I was like, yes, that is the time that we're in. We've all lost, I mean, I know I've lost community members. It was devastating. Tony Bernabe was a leader in the immigrant rights struggle, and it's just so devastating that he died from COVID. We've like other friends and families, and also just the solitude and the racial, just seeing things play out in such clear, just so much, sorry, it's just so devastating to see things play out so unequally, you know, between the haves and the have-nots. And it just made that so much more clear during COVID. And I think we're all recovering from that trauma, but we're also all kind of seeing, well, how do we come out of this and integrate what we learned? But also we need to process this trauma. It was just so much.
Right. It is so much to hold, and it particularly with just the pace and the consistency and the rapid levels of how much just waves of grief, and even just divisive energy and disappointment and frustration and all of the ways in which these complex emotions are wrapped in each other. And there hasn't really been space to grieve, to process, to heal. And so it's just so important, the work that you're doing, the spaces that are being created, the mentorship and the level of depth of beautiful communities, some of which you've described, because those places, those relationships, those communities are where we get to do this repair together.
Mm-hmm.
And it is an ongoing process. It's not something that we're going to figure out this month or this year. But I'd love to, as we start to bring our conversation to a close, hear a bit about the ways in which you support yourself with staying grounded, staying rooted, and finding ease amidst this powerful time on the planet.
Absolutely. So, yeah, in times that we've lived through, and definitely more people who've been more exposed have been more devastated by these times. But I do think healing is community and relationships, especially the types of relationships that we want to build, nonviolent relationships, honest relationships, transparent relationships, where it's normal to check in and just say, I know we agreed to this. Is it still working for you? This is how I'm feeling. Not waiting till we're exploding, So just tending to relationships has been very powerful for me. And being of service has been powerful as well to my clients, and also dreaming up like how to bring back all these different parts of my lived experiences and things I care about, like art and community building, and how do I do that now in a way that can bring about power and change. And I love doing individual trauma work, and I think it's important to have confidentiality in many regards, because sometimes you just need that one-on-one. But there is so much to be experienced when we share. We can feel that collective connection, and that's what I think we need so much more of. So I'm really excited to see where that's gonna go. But yeah, just meeting folks like you and just a lot of beautiful people along the way is just very grounding to see, like, we're not alone. And I think some of the ancestral work is so powerful because we can also feel like we're not alone, like the survival of our predecessors and what they did to connect to, like, music, stories, poetry, dance, all of that. That is the medicine, and that's what we need more of. And we need to get away from the idea that our value in society comes at the cost of our humanity. Like, that is no longer possible. That's not sustainable for anybody
At all.
Mm.
Ooh, yeah, I feel like I know that is the case, but that languaging for some reason just really hit me just now, that are currently in this like white supremacist, capitalist, patriarchal society, the value is gained by disconnecting from humanity. And that is just completely unsustainable. And so it's just so powerful for us to reconnect with ourselves, with each other, with the planet, with art, with music, with all of these healing modalities that actually allow us to reconnect with our humanity. That is, as you're saying, that is the medicine, that is the key, that is the answer. Wow. So I'm so grateful that we've had the opportunity to have this deep dive conversation today. And I feel like I could keep talking to you for hours.
Thank you. I really hope we can continue to connect. I'm so excited about what you're creating and just taking whatever tools are available in this time and just making something like this happen. So thank you for shining that light.
Oh, absolutely. And so I know that this audience would love to know what ways they can stay connected with you.
Well, I put a lot of stuff on my Instagram, which is at Social Justice Healing, and I invite folks to connect with me there. You could also go to my website if you're curious about other practices. It's just socialjusticehealing.com. And if you also just want me to hold a dream with you, I would love to do that. Like I always ask people, like, this is what I'm imagining, hold it
Yeah.
with me. And then like lo and behold, things do come together, but I feel like in isolation, it doesn't have as much like permanence. So I do want to invite your audience to like dream with me, like let me hold your dream with you, and let's have those conversations.
Oh, I love that. Holding dreams together and how powerful that can be. Well, Claudia, thank you so much again for joining us. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in as well. And I look forward to being able to connect with you throughout the remainder of this summit. Bye, everyone.
Bye.